Hi, thanks for joining me. Today I'm going to do a review of Steins Gate Zero for the PlayStation Vita. Now, the story of Steins Gate is one that is dear to my heart. I just absolutely adore the original story. I was introduced to it via the anime series a number of years ago, and it's a full TV season, not one of the short seasons. It's like 24, 25 episodes series, and it's just fantastic. When I found out that there was going to be a sequel, I was just completely excited for it. I did play or read, I suppose, the visual novel originally on the PlayStation Vita, but I read it after I saw the anime. It was enjoyable both times, but there's something about being able to experience this story, Steins Gate Zero, the first time playing through the game, where it was just a completely novel and wonderful experience for me. The story and the writing are once again top-notch, and the story sucked me in almost immediately. I just felt like I was right back with the characters and in the world of Steins Gate, and I think that if you love that world, you're going to love the story in Steins Gate Zero. If anything, the writing seems better than in the first game. If it's possible, it may be even more engaging, and I think it's indicative of the strength of the original development team, the original writers, to craft this time travel story just so well. It feels to me almost like Back to the Future 2 in comparison to Back to the Future 1, where Back to the Future 2 built on the events of Back to the Future 1 and expanded the story so much that it was almost an even better and more engaging movie than the first one. Suffice to say, if you enjoyed the first Steins Gate, I think that you will be very pleased with Steins Gate Zero. The story picks up from the events in the first game, playing like a sequel or a continuation, but it actually very specifically picks up from a world line that is kind of just outside of the true ending of the first game. So Steins Gate Zero really is bringing us through events that lead to the true ending of the original Steins Gate. So it's not so much a sequel or a continuation as it is an expansion of the original Steins Gate story. The story takes place in this game from the point of view of not just who was our main character, Okabe Rintaro, but also from various side characters, which as far as I know is something new to the series. I think that it's really a fresh element to Steins Gate Zero, and it makes for a very nice change of pace. You continue to influence events via a mechanic of using your cell phone. While it's something of a minor novelty, I think that it adds to the immersion of the game, as opposed to just hitting a wall of 3 choices that you have to pick from. Actually, within the game, being able to pull out and put away your cell phone, being able to respond to text messages that you received from other characters at various points in the game, frequently that don't even have anything to do with branching the story, I think adds to the immersion a lot, and it just is one other element that keeps you engaged in the world and the characters of the Steins Gate games. That said, the mechanic can be somewhat confusing on your first playthrough, even for someone who has read the original visual novel. I felt like it took me about halfway through my first playthrough to really feel comfortable with what the cues meant and what sort of things I could and couldn't do with my phone and how it was having an influence on the events in the game. As this time through the story, you aren't so much directly influencing the way that the time travel mechanic plays out. The stakes during shifts in the world lines feels significantly higher than it did in the first game. Because of this, you get to feel some of the helplessness of the main character, and that's another thing that I think is very interesting about Steins Gate Zero. Whereas the first game, our character Okabe Rintaro he's very immature in his personality in some ways, and a lot of the first game is really a story of his own personal growth and sort of becoming a more complete person, I think that this game is more a story of redemption, and we get to see Okabe Rintaro as kind of a broken man and somebody who's really struggling with the events of the first game, in the particular world line that we're playing through right now, and it gives him a very different tone. It gives the story a very different tone. He's actually suffering from post-traumatic stress. Certainly as somebody who has had anxiety issues myself, I can sympathize very strongly with it, but I think he's definitely a very sympathetic protagonist in this, and it's again fun and satisfying to see him go through a progression as a character as he struggles with these feelings of defeat and of self-loathing and blaming himself for some of the events of the first game. Now, this game does introduce a lot of new characters, maybe I should say a few new characters. You have some characters who were from the American university that Makise Kurisu did her research at. The first of which is Maho Hyajo, who is another researcher, a peer of Kurisu's. You also have her mentor as well as Kurisu's. This is Dr. Leskinen, and they end up entering the story as two people from the Brain Research Institute who happen to be researching memories and artificial intelligence. And it's not really a spoiler to reveal that these two characters have actually digitized Makise Kurisu's memories from before she came over to Japan in the first game, and have used those memories to create an artificial intelligence that you're able to interact with in this game. And that's one way that that character of Makise Kurisu, who is very important, a very big character in the original games, gets to become a character again in Steins Gate Zero. You also have the introduction of a new character, Shiina Kagari. And all of the original characters come back to play a role, even side characters like Kiryu Moeka. You certainly have Okabe's right-hand man, Daru, one of my favorite characters from the original story. And I think he gets fleshed out, I would say in particular, quite a bit more. I felt like in the original game he was kind of comic relief, and he was there as like the hacker character, and also a lot of the otaku culture and just goofy otaku-ness from him, because he's like such a shameless otaku character. But his hacker side is fleshed out a lot more in this. I feel like his otaku side takes a bit of a backseat, and also his interactions with Suzuha Amane. Those two characters in particular, I think, get a lot of fleshing out in this game and a lot of screen time, and I think that they're very good in this novel. I really enjoyed the two of their characters. The goofy otaku culture element still has a presence in this story, but I think especially people who are put off by that to a certain extent in the first story are going to be pleased that this is much more of a science fiction story. I think because of that, it's also a slightly more confusing story. The structure of the original game and novel was one of putting the pieces back together of something of a broken world, whereas in this game you don't have nearly as much control over the events going on. You're more of an observer, and you are trying to put together the pieces of a mystery that is happening across multiple world lines. And as you play through the game, as in the previous novel, you're revealed more and more about various characters. I feel like necessarily there's a bit more to keep track of in this game, and therefore it can be a bit confusing. I'm not going to presume to say that I have the entire story all figured out and I was able to follow everything flawlessly throughout the game, but I think suffice to say, the game does address a lot of elements from the first game and a lot of new elements that it brings up in this story, and has a very satisfying conclusion. I think it gives you a lot to think about, and I think it does a good job of tying up its own loose ends. Now, I did go ahead and watch a playthrough of the whole game again on YouTube, just to kind of re-experience the story and get my own thoughts straight about it. And that's one of the things I really enjoy about this, and really about any, really good book or really good movie, is when you can go back and you can re-experience something, and you can realize things that you didn't realize the first time, or you can get more out of something the second time that you experience it. I think that's a sign that something is well written, that it's deep, that there's a lot to it. And I think that you're going to find that meat here in Steins Gate Zero. Now, unfortunately, there were some technical issues that were prominent and problematic, I would say, from the original development, and especially from the North American or the English language localization. And if I were to rationalize these elements, I think that what I would say is probably when you have a story-based game like this, that when you're doing a sequel, it's an assumption that it's not going to be as successful as the original. I think the original was very successful. The visual novel was released on a bunch of different platforms. It had an anime. But at the same time, I think that when it comes to this sequel, the assumption is that not everyone who experienced and enjoyed the first story are going to come back for a second helping. Where I think that rears its head the most in the original development is certainly not in the writing, which I think was arguably better than in the first game, but in the character art. The character artist from the original game makes a reappearance. His name is Huke or Huke. His designs are a lot of fun, and I think they've matured a lot in this iteration. But with that maturation, you also occasionally have imperfections in it that I think stick out a little bit more in this game than they did in the artwork, honestly, of the original game. And not only that, but they do reuse some assets from the original game in this, and especially when you see those assets used together in the same screen, I think that they clash pretty harshly. So on some level, I sort of wish that the character designs had been more closely stylized consistently with the first game, or that the art assets had been completely redone for this game, as opposed to reusing some assets and making some new assets. Additionally, some of the CG images look as though they were made by different artists. If that wasn't the case, then at least it seems like some of the CG in the game were made under very different time constraints than other ones. And this does stick out to a certain extent. Something that I think sticks out a little bit more is some technical issues with the localization. Now, when I first started playing the game, I noticed a weird visual issue with transitions between scenes, and after having played the game for maybe 10 to 12 hours, I started thinking, man, I wonder if there's an update that is going to fix some of these issues. So I went ahead and checked for the update. There was one. I downloaded it, and it corrupted my save files. Now, this was frustrating. Thankfully, the game does include a skip feature, and you can, in the options, toggle the skip feature to allow you to skip scenes that you have not yet seen. By default, of course, it doesn't allow skipping over scenes that you haven't yet seen, which is just a sensible default, so that you don't end up skipping scenes that you would otherwise want to have seen. And also it helps you when you're going through and trying to figure out which routes are new and which routes are not. But suffice to say, I didn't realize right away that I could enable that option, so I actually had to replay through quite a bit of the game, number of hours, 6, 7, 8 hours, until I realized that you could actually put that skip feature on, and I was able to save myself a few hours of replaying the game. That aside, there were also numerous typos and possibly lines attributed to the wrong characters. You also had a technical issue with font descenders being cut off. If you look closely at any of the English language text, you'll see that any of the Y's, P's, Q's, and G's have their descenders clipped at the bottom of the characters. And this is something that, as somebody who in an amateur capacity does translate video games, it sticks out, and I don't want to say that it took a lot away from my enjoyment of the game, but I was sad to see that it seems like the localization process may have been very rushed, or had a very low budget, or just have been handled in a very amateurish way, and that was a bit surprising because I don't remember the localization of the original game having issues like that. Technical issues aside, I can't say enough good things about reading the visual novel Steins Gate Zero. It took me about 40 hours to read over about 2 weeks, and if you guys have been watching my videos recently, I've been lamenting the fact that I didn't read this in 2017 so that it could be part of my Games of the Year in 2017, but considering that it did take me about 40 hours to complete all of the routes in the game, it would have been a little tough for me to squeeze that into that last week of the year, since this was a Christmas gift for me. But this is around the length of a standard RPG, and if you like good stories, if you play games and read visual novels for great characters, and if you like interesting science fiction and interesting time travel stories, Steins Gate Zero delivers in spades. If you enjoyed the first game, if you enjoyed reading the first visual novel, you owe it to yourself to read Steins Gate Zero. It's that good. I would say if I had to compare it to the original game, it's at least on par with the first game, and I don't think you're going to play through it and say, oh, this is perfect, but as far as a follow-up to what I consider to be one of the best time travel stories of the past decade easily, at least that I've experienced, you can't really go wrong. you couldn't ask for something better than Steins Gate Zero. Now, interestingly, there is an anime that is coming up in April of 2018, so if you don't get a chance to read this visual novel, I would recommend watching that anime. But like I said, this is a story that is worth re-experiencing, and I personally am looking so forward to being able to watch the anime after having read the visual novel. So if you guys enjoy reading, if you have a Vita or a PlayStation 4 and you're you're willing to sit down and take that time and read through this, you're going to have a wonderful time, and I think that you will enjoy just as much revisiting the story when the anime comes out in April of 2018. So that has been my review of Steins Gate Zero. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll join me again for more video game and anime related videos. Take care.